This controversy isn't going to go away quietly now, is it? And now Cadillac is sounding off. Looks like Totosaurus Rex better be ready for a fight, and I hope he's got plenty of printer ink. What started as a clever interpretation around measurement has escalated into a full political split. Mercedes on one side, Ferrari, Honda, Audi, and now Ferrari's best bud Cadillac on the other. Even Red Bull's tone has shifted. This is evolving fast, people. So then the FIA steps in for the first time, in an official capacity, with a YouTube explainer video, dropping this particular statement within it for their single-seater showrunner, Nicholas Tombazis, which I shall share with you now for your consideration. These engineers are very clever and always pushing for an advantage. Some have found ways to potentially increase it when the engine is running hot, and that is the discussion we're having now. We have spent a lot of time discussing how we solve these issues. Our intention is to solve them before the start of the season. We don't want controversies. We want people to be competing on the track, not in the courtroom or the steward's room. And that's what we're trying to do. Oh, Nicholas, you've walked straight into that one, haven't you? Because the FIA is now in that classic FIA position, in that no matter what they do, somebody's gonna come out of this absolutely hating their guts. Because this whole fight is really less about what Mercedes is actually cooked up within their own combustion engine and more about what does real even mean? What is the actual way of measuring this particular technique? The measuring? Well, that's down to the FIA to get right, and clearly they didn't think about the idea of measuring at temperature, which is why everyone else is so mad at Mercedes and trying to get them down. So naturally things are getting spicy. And the FIA is sweating buckets. You're either going to piss off Mercedes and their customers, or you're going to piss off the majority of teams. Pick your poison, because sure, a compression ratio not exceeding 16:1 is a simple sentence, but the sport really doesn't live inside simple sentences. Teams are always looking for unexplored avenues and interpretations. And in this case, the likes of Ron Meadows, their sporting director, and the people over at the powertrains division of Mercedes, they clearly hit upon something which might offer them an opportunity for that little bit of extra efficiency, which might improve their drivability of the car, as well as getting more bang for your buck, considering that the cost of fuel for these cars is going to be astronomically higher than it was last year. We're talking several times more. So the argument really shouldn't be focused towards Mercedes, and instead it really should be over to the governing body as to finding the right way to check these things and to make sure it doesn't end up ruining the rating, because we were worrying about these cars being unreliable as well as the teams. Well, at the moment, there doesn't really seem to be any major issues. It doesn't seem all that much different to what we got last year with proven technology. And Mr. Tombazis himself has admitted that the FIA is trying to calm things down, but they are very much stuck over a barrel at the moment, aren't they? Because in that video, he said that some engineers have found a way to potentially increase the ratio when the engine is running hot, which suggests that all of those rumours, they were serious enough that they had to get this resolved before the first race around Melbourne. And why everyone's reacting right now like this is that a dynamic measurement in this area of the car would set a precedent. Because normally the majority of measurements are done in parc fermé. Things are either approved or sent off to be potentially disqualified. And it's not like things aren't measured in real time. The F1 world does have real-time sensors in the sense of fuel flow and checking out the aero, what with all those little random dots on the rear wings and front wings and what have you. You know, flexi wing, remember that saga? But applying live measurements from within the actual internal combustion engine of the power unit would change a lot of things and require some really intricate sounding doodads. And this all has to be potentially approved within the space of less than 4 weeks. Because once you actually start caring about what goes on inside that power unit when it's running in active conditions at temperature, then you might be policing a whole range of different behaviours and characteristics regarding the engine. And this is going to affect not only Mercedes, but there's McLaren, the defending Constructors and Drivers Champions, there's Williams, and now there's Alpine. So I'm imagining Flavio right now, he's looking at all of this and saying, and it's only adding to the problems that clearly Renault Group and Alpine are dealing with right now. That for another video. So subscribe to this channel for when that controversial ticket drops. And then you got Cadillac just strolling in here like the new kids sitting at the adults' table. They're just wading in with all of this political heft, and Ferrari's just going, this new political ally, not gonna lie, it's a lot more substantial than Sauber was. Not to mention, Cadillac can bring this argument to a brand new audience that may not have been aware of the engine compression limit, nor would they have cared for it. They may do now that Cadillac's gotten involved. Their main rep down tower has said, according to Planet F1, there is a unanimous view outside of Mercedes about what should happen next. That's quite important because Cadillac isn't even racing yet, and they're already shaping the politics, supporting their supplier Ferrari, as well as Honda, as well as Audi. And let's be real, Cadillac will be a lot more valuable to Ferrari than their previous customer team. In this case, they're on side with them, as well as Audi, so everyone in that little circle wins, so even better. But Caddy stepping in like this sets the enforcement culture of this year, before the season's really begun, because everyone's prepared to fight each other about anything. And I keep telling you this is only the first controversy that we are going to be seeing this year, my friend. This might, in a few months' time, the engine compression stuff, sound quite quaint, because there are other elements of these new cars that might be even more potent than bang for your buck, because we've heard this from Haas's Ayo Komatsu, Williams' technical bod Matt Harmon, and I know you're sick and tired of me talking about Komatsu-san's findings, but they are really valid here and can offer a bit of a smokescreen for Mercedes to try and figure out what to do next. Because you got Ayo over here shouting, "Guys, you're arguing over a possible steady advantage while the new cars can lose half a second to even 7/10 just by messing up the management of the energy." That is a real concern, and it really could be more detrimental to a driver's performance and future in the sport. You need to be managing a lot of things at the same time. And whilst I believe that the majority of drivers will adapt, you get the likes of Fernando Alonso saying that it requires a lot more of your brain power to manage these cars, and they have lost a little bit of joy to drive. Whilst at the same time, you've got the likes of Lewis Hamilton saying it's actually more fun to drive these cars. So you're going to see a massive swing in the pecking order of these drivers as to who can adapt the fastest and the best. So do keep that in mind here. Some drivers will do better than others. This might skew a lot of things, and it might mean that drivers that might have been successful in 2025 ultimately might end up falling flat on their face. And I know I've talked about Ayo Komatsu's contributions, but Matt Harmon's contributions over at Williams are probably just as important, as I mentioned in my Williams video last week. His blunt assessment regarding the fact that teams may end up burning more fuel through the corners, revving higher than before, can mean about recharging the battery rather than gaining speed in that turn. Also, they don't run out of electrical punch later on in the lap when they can activate it down the straights. That's the point here. In 2026, a lap becomes an energy budget, and that budget is increasingly becoming electrical. That reframes everything in Formula One, because the whole system is designed around a much bigger electrical contribution, a 50-50 split, 8.5 megajoules per lap. I'm a child of the 80s and the 90s, so saying megajoule sounds amazing, like Megatron, and that was actually an engine manufacturer back in the day, Megatron. And yes, I do recall that whilst Christian Horner was still around, he was very much lobbying with Ferrari to change the skew to being slightly more towards the combustion engine side of things, instead of it being 50-50 split, but Mercedes held firm, and they have kept things the way they are, 50-50. Maybe this could be their revenge, the other teams, and trying to get back at Toto after hustling that particular nugget. I mean, I'll put the foam out for that one. But we are seeing Formula One rebrand things to be more electronically skewed, because we've actually now, for the first time, gotten the proper maps from the FIA regarding when you can activate those things. DRS is gone. Overtake zones are here. In the case of Sakir, there are 4 of them, with dry activation points and wet activation points, which means that it's not as cut and dry as it was with no DRS or DRS. So don't you see? All of this paints a racing environment where this blasted engine trick becomes both smaller and bigger than it looks. It's less cut and dry here. And maybe this is why Toto is sort of lashing out in different directions rather than just simply remaining stoic. It's smaller because all or some of those potential gains could get wiped out by one bad deployment call, yet bigger because any increase in thermal efficiency changes the entire energy economy. As in, you can do more with the same amount of fuel, which again will be quite pricey, and we are in the middle of a cost cap. That will be very, very crucial. And if you also have that same amount of efficiency, it might allow you to waste that same fuel by revving a little more in the corners, which is a revelation that the likes of Williams stumbled upon, thanks to, of course, having those Mercedes engines. But I can easily imagine the bean counters who decide the budget for the fuel will be wincing every single time they do it. They'll be just thinking, oh, that's another few £100 down the drain. And it also might mean less times throughout an entire lap they might have to, the drivers, rely on lifting and coasting. And as we saw with the Ferrari boys over 2025, lifting and coasting, it's not fun. That damn Lyco. We want to avoid that. It could happen with these cars, But if they get the efficiency right and they get the technique through the corners down, we might escape that little travesty. But in the case of Ferrari, they were having to resort to Lyco for a completely different reason, which completely ruined their season. So if you get all of this right, it means by the time you get to those overtake zones, you'll have a lot more charge than potentially the guy in front of you, and you might be able to just right past them with a potential 20, 25, 30 mile an hour speed difference. It's going to look completely like two different formulas. You might be in that defending car feeling like you literally have a GP2 engine. So when you actually stop to look about it, as you dig a little bit deeper, you do start to understand why Toto might be getting this upset. It does sound like 3 or 4 tenths here, and you might want to get the battery deployment right, but it can be one of two things. In that these brand new power units and these cars are a little more nuanced to try and understand about which is the fastest and which isn't. You can't just rely on the horsepower number anymore and call it a day. And let's not forget, you can't accrue any more energy from the turbo because the MGU-H is gone. No more harvesting energy from that particular area, so you've got to make your combustion efficiency even more important. If one manufacturer extracts more thermal efficiency that could change drivability, as well as energy timing and deployment, that could be big. So in that sense, could Toto's really hard stance, now the story's evolved into something more universally controversial, be a case of misdirection while Mercedes focuses on the real goal, which we might not even know about at this point? Maybe, but a deliberate decoy? That feels a little bit too cute for Toto, and when could you ever describe Toto as being cute? Toto is clearly angry at what's happening here, because as you've heard from him time and time again, he has been in consultation with the FIA multiple times to ensure that what they are doing is on the level and according to the rules, and thusly, according to the FIA, according to him, it's all homologated and everything's absolutely gravy. And clearly the other teams didn't come across this hack. Red Bull did have some Mercedes people, they tried it, it seemingly didn't work, so they hung on the fence, and then Ben Hodgkinson said just like, well, we don't worry about this at the Red Bull launch. Then they suddenly went, oh, we could really nobble Mercedes here because they're looking really spicy in the shakedown. Oh, we'll change our minds. This is why it's getting really spicy, because Red Bull has just skewed this over to it actually being a legitimate problem. I'm not blaming Red Bull per se here, but the pantomime that we were used to from Christian Horner, it's not here anymore. It's so much more subtle than it was. And then you got the FIA admitting that there actually is a problem regarding this area of the engine, and they do want to actually find a solution before round 1. But you have the Totosaurus Rex stomping around complaining that everyone's out to get him and his customers unfairly because they've been following the rules. What are you gonna do? Especially since, again, he sells to 3 other teams. These tickets are really important, and it could compromise McLaren's hunt for maybe 3 Constructors' Championships in a row. But maybe there's a more grounded plan here. Think of it as a war on 2 fronts using the same resource, and that resource, as you can probably tell, is attention. The hardware battle is about what's legal and what's frozen. The software battle is also to do with integration and who can learn the fastest, and that's going to be very important here. The team with the least amount of surprises and can learn the fastest in this brand new regulation, which is very different to what's gone before, will be champions, not necessarily who's got the simply fastest car. It's got to be the entire widget that's best. And this second thing is the decider that could actually decide the pecking order of the championship relatively early, because if you understand the model of the car really quickly, that can then seep into other elements of the car and how you handle your drivers, how you handle the setting up of the car, as well as the strategy. And by the time we get to the summer break, we'll get a really good understanding about where all of these teams are going to go, and which drivers will be sinking and which ones will be swimming. So drivers and engineers might have to collaborate in a wholly different way to get the best out of each party. It's going to be really, really all about efficiency here, not just from the cars, but also from the staff. Because future mistakes could be immediate, in real time, if you completely botch the deployment strategy. So maybe this compression ratio row stoked by their rivals and the fans really getting on board to try and get Mercedes down is to force this team to spend its precious early season brainpower defending a baseline advantage, whilst rivals sprint ahead on the harder problems, which is maybe making the whole hybrid system sing, to stop Mercedes dominating like they did in 2014. Or to buy the other teams some time. That doesn't require Toto to be lying or cheating, because I and the FIA believe it's been quite open throughout all of this stuff, nor does it require the secret meetings, something which Wolff alluded to and is very aggressive and, profane defense during the formal W17 launch. It only requires one truth here, that you can't fully optimize everything at once. Because a late rule clarification can waste time for just about everybody, because there's a whole lot of processes which need to be changed and verified and then counter-verified. And also, like I said earlier, the FIA's got to find the right tools which everybody can agree with and can easily fit the job. Because you remember the whole thing about plank wear and what have you, and complaining that the tools weren't exactly accurate until they proved they actually were, and they are tried and tested techniques that have lasted for decades? Yeah, that thing. You need to make sure you've got the right bits and bobs to verify. And right now, I don't know what they are, nor do I think the FIA knows what they are, nor whether they can trust them. And losing a small chunk of that time, those few weeks, could be absolutely lethal, all while Mercedes is trying to build an ecosystem of their own with 4 teams, including their own. I know Ferrari is technically powering 3 teams, including their own, but having that extra one can make a whole lot of difference. Those couple extra 100 laps per test, it adds up. And in a cost-cap world where you might have to spend money and time correcting an issue when it does prove to be illegal, that's time you'll never get back, as well as money you'll never get back. And every single customer will be bringing data back to the Mercedes powertrain division to ensure that what they've got is something good, and then they can develop it even more. So maybe Mercedes' strongest weapon is the fact that they have that particular ecosystem in which to sup from. And not forgetting that one of them was the Constructors' Champion and has a seat at the table. McLaren and Mercedes, they are very close. But at the same time, though, it can be rather expensive because you've got to make all of those power units to use over the season, and Toto has admitted that if the rules do change again for the 2030s, he might consider dropping a customer. But as I have alluded to in other videos of my own, I do believe that Williams might be the likely one to perhaps move on to a different customer, or maybe become a works team of their own. And that's why a controversy like this that questions the legality of something is really dangerous, because it's not only going to affect Mercedes, it's going to affect McLaren, it's going to affect Williams, it's going to affect Alpine. Very big teams, 2 of them front runners at this time, or at least they have been front runners for a good long while now. This could completely upend the front running dynamic here. Not to mention, those 3 teams are going to have to carry the political baggage every single time there's a technical meeting, or an appeal, or a rejection, or any sort of drama. They are going to be roped into it whether they like it or not. And that lineup that Mercedes might bring to the table is a very hefty one. You got Toto, obviously, you got Zach and Andrea, you got James Vowles over at Williams, you got Flavio Briatore there, wading in potentially. And yes, there is the Alpine team principal, Steve Nielsen. You might not think much of him, but you got to remember that before he took up this gig, he was the FIA sporting director for a short while, so there is some FIA heft in there too. And maybe this might also explain why Audi's been prepared to go to the wall over this situation, that they've been one of the most vocal up until now regarding protesting Mercedes to the bitter end, because this is a matter of absolute survival and understanding where they're even going to go in terms of development. They just want answers, and ideally something they don't have to spend an arm and a leg in trying to fix, because, as I said after the shakedown, they've got a very long list of things to do. Because a steady baseline, which is almost impossible to catch, could be absolutely catastrophic for their long-term prospects. And they're going to fight tooth and nail about this because they were tempted to join the sport because of the engine regulations, and this is what they get in return? So, okay, what can Mercedes do here without looking like the villain? Even though the wider fandom is already condemning them as villains, even though technically they're not cheating. It's the FIA which might have done-goofed here. So first, maybe they should just rely to saying we're legal, but do so calmly. So no more rants from Toto, because Tombazis has already framed the FIA's goal as solving it before the season and keeping it off the courtroom track. Mercedes should lean into that goal publicly and not fight the premise. To hear Toto get this vociferous is a little bit out of character, and it's also sort of brought a lot more eyes onto the subject, as in getting your S blank 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 together. Okay, that's going to attract a lot of attention and maybe make people think, well, what exactly are you hiding? Because I've heard a lot of technical jargon, which I don't exactly fully understand, about secret chambers or something like that. And that if that's the case, and they're rumbled at temperature, that could be them completely ruined, as well as 3 other teams. And there were also those rumblings that the head of Mercedes-Benz himself was prepared to go to court over these allegations and cheating and the changing of the rules. And even though they were disputed, the fact they were even in circulation tells you all you need to know. Or maybe they help the FIA find a measurement process which is robust, something that they fully believe in, which might convince the other teams to then go along with it, and then everything is happy. or at least as happy as they can be in this situation. Because the FIA doesn't want to ban cleverness here, because that's something I'm also seeing on social media, that this whole thing is punishing intelligence, and why should engineers even bother finding innovations if it's going to be struck out into oblivion? It just wants the rules to be clarified in a way which doesn't turn every single steward session into some kind of physics class or something like that, or arguing the justifications of how does something exist when it's hot and then when it's cold. It wants to keep things simple and something that is measurable and technically black and white. And yes, that might sound like a boring outcome, but boring is good. We don't want these FIA technical gremlins to be the headline, because we would rather have the racing be the headline here. So if they come up with a solution that everybody's happy with and is reliable, then cool. We don't need to hear about it anymore. They could also, Mercedes, go all in on the real prize here, and something that Matt Harmon alluded to. Because Harmon's burn fuel to change the battery comment is basically a warning that some cars will feel, look, and sound weird going forward. And the teams that understand that weirdness the best will look like geniuses. Yeah, that genius is almost frightening. So, in the light of all of this, Mercedes can provide a power unit which is completely reliable, it's fast, it can go through the processes without any trouble. It'll go away from the whole cheating angle to thinking, wow, Mercedes legitimately came up with something really cool. And it points to a comment that Lance Stroll made rather petulantly, say, George won't mind if he's 30 seconds down the road. Seriously, there's a lot of beef between Lance and George that goes back a whole decade and more. Oh, you hate Russell's guts, don't you? But yeah, Mercedes just needs to make the engine bulletproof and reliable and not controversial, so the compression ratio thing, it won't even matter. It'll just make their opponents look like desperate fools. Because the real fastest car in 2026 may be about who can be the best energy trader, managing the balance between the combustion side and the electrical side. If they can do that, then they will easily gain lap time. You can't just brute force your way through a lap anymore. You can't just have the best combustion bit, but a middling battery side, or having the best aerodynamic, which might explain why Fernando Alonso's been a bit downbeat, saying, oh, the first 3 or 4 races, don't expect much from us, but the middle of the season, yeah! And Adrian Newey saying, oh, we're 4 months behind everyone else. Okay. I really feel bad for the Aston stands right now, and I feel really bad for Lance as well. You're gonna need someone who can actually feel the battery about when it's about to give out, when to charge, and then deploy it at the right times. And quite honestly, I think the best strategy might be you just don't worry about the first couple of activation points and you go for the second half in qualifying. The skill gap is about to become visible in a whole new way, my friend. Those who can think for themselves and take in all of this new management whilst going forward at 200 miles the best will be the best. So yeah, the compression fight and the politics around them are real, and Toto is being Toto, albeit a little bit more profane. But the bigger story hiding underneath is weirder, because F1's drifting toward a form of racing where power becomes dance choreography, and the teams that learn that choreography first are going to make everyone else look like they're driving last year's sport. But make no mistake, this is far from over, because even though nobody wants a fight, I feel like there is going to be a fight anyway, and this will be just the first of many. Because it's always easier to shoot something down politically rather than having to technically get your sleeves up and figure out the problem yourself. The other teams right now are making the most of kicking Toto in the balls, and the FIA is over here having initially agreed with Mercedes, and you got Toto down here looking up at Nicholas Tombazis and saying, oh, not you too, I thought you were my friend. And where you should look next is to this video right here, because I know you're going to enjoy it. I'll see you over there.